Hi everybody, I'm Dave Thomas, and today I am building the LOC1 Big Nuke by LOC Precision. And the LOC1 series are smaller versions of their high power rockets. So instead of the Big Nuke, maybe we could call this the Little Nuke. And I'm really a big fan of these kits. They're really robust compared to equal sized kits of other manufacturers. The only thing I don't like about them is that they don't come with instructions. Instead, they come with a QR code that you can scan, and it will take you to their website where you can download these instructions. Now the problem with these instructions is that they're generic. They use the same instruction sheet for all of their models. So as we go along, I'll point out a few differences here that apply specifically to this rocket. Alright, but otherwise let's go through and see what's in the package here. Okay, so we have a pre-slotted body tube, nice heavy one. The small package here contains a streamer and a streamer protector made out of Nomex, as well as a Kevlar shock cord. Okay, we have the nose cone here that is in two parts. Motor mount tube, and then in this little package we've got the fins with through the wall tabs, so those will go into our fin slots here. Centering rings, thrust ring, engine clip, and launch lug. And then we've got some self-stick decals here, which you can use or not at your pleasure. Okay, but that's to kind of give you their layout of what this is going to look like. Your rocket does not need to look the same. To start with, we're going to build the motor mount here, and you're going to need a ruler and a pencil. And so the first thing we're going to do is measure 1/4 of an inch from one end here. Nope, got the right scale going. Alright, so 1/4 inch is going to be right there, and just make a little mark with a pencil. Okay, and then that is where the engine clip is going to mount in. So I'm going to cut about a 1/8 inch wide notch at my point. And if we open up the little package of motor mount parts here, so the end of this that just has the single 90-degree bend in it, that's going to go right into that slot, just like that. Okay, and now we're going to take our rings here, Alright, now they're not giving us a specific point to put these on, so I'm going to start with putting one ring on just over the insert point there, and I'm going to put the other ring on here in the back. Alright, let's do it this way. I'm going to take that forward ring, push it to the back. Alright, and then I'll put another ring on to be the forward ring there. Now when this all gets pushed in, so if I take our body tube here, alright, when we finish, the motor mount tube should be flush with our body tube. And then this centering ring cannot be up in here. Alright, so I'm going to back that off a little bit so that now when I measure this against it, alright, still up. So basically this is going to mean I'm going to bring this pretty much all the way down. Alright, can move it up just a little bit there. Okay, and then this one I'm going to leave up here at the top where it holds my clip on there. Now the only disadvantage to this is it means there's not a lot of play in this clip to get the motor in and out, but it is enough. Okay, and if needed you can actually bend this outward a little bit. So with that in mind, I'm going to add some glue to this. I'm going to pull the forward one down a bit and apply some glue all the way around it. Maybe. Okay, apply glue all the way around here. It's actually way more than I need, so I'm just going to take my finger and spread the rest of that around. Okay, and then if you get any on the outside of the ring there, go ahead and just wipe that off. And then if you have any excess, you can put that on the inside there. Okay, and then for the aft ring, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull that back all the way aft. Put some glue around there. And smooth that all the way around. I'm using wood glue. You can use white glue as well. Either one works fine. Alright, and now I'm going to move that upward to where it was. And do the same thing here. Okay, and then I'm going to take the thrust ring here, and this is going to go right above the end of the clip there. So for this, I don't want to get a lot of glue in here. I'm going to be really sparing, because we don't want glue down below the engine clip and in the main part of the motor mount tube. So use a pretty sparing amount of glue here. Just get a nice even coating all the way around and then slide that in, and it's going to come to rest right on top of the clip. Okay, and now I'm going to let that whole thing dry up for a little bit. While the glue on my motor mount is drying, I'm going to do a little bit of prep work here before we're ready to put the fins on. Now in the instructions they show putting the launch lug on at pretty much an estimated point after we put the fins on. And I really don't like to do that. I really prefer to have a known guide here. So what I'm going to do is just take my pencil and pick a spot halfway between two fins and just make a mark here. Okay, and then I'm going to take a straight edge, and this is a fin marking guide that Estes makes, but you can also just use a door frame for this. You just need something to allow you to make a straight line up here. Alright, so I'm just going to draw a line about halfway up the tube. And again here, there's no distance set forth in how far that launch lug should go up. So I'm just going to use about 2 inches, or about 5 centimeters there, and that's where the aft end of my launch lug will go. So then if I take my launch lug, and it's not a very big one, alright, it'll go in place here after we've got the fins on. Now what I'm going to do here, well, I've got no fins, and this is easier to work with. I'm just going to mark where the top's going to be there. Okay, and I'm just going to take a little bit of sandpaper. Anything between about 100 and 220 is fine. And I'm just going to sand very lightly along the line there where that launch lug is going to be. And that just makes the glue hold better. So that after we get the fins glued on, we'll be able to glue the launch lug on right away and not worry about if it's on straight. We've got a nice guideline here to tell us when it's straight. And it'll just be a whole lot less headache that way. The other thing we can do is do a little bit of sanding on our fins here. Okay, so these are actually very, very thin plywood fins, so it doesn't make any difference which way the grain is going on them. And these have been laser cut, so you can see that there's soot all along the edges here. And so what I like to do is just take some fine grit sandpaper and just sand the surface, take off some of that soot. Okay, and this has got a really fine grain to it. It may be basswood or it may be like a hardwood in there. It's very light, but it's got a very tight grain. So you really don't have to worry about using sanding sealer like you would on balsa. All right, just by priming and painting that should fill in the grain nicely. Okay, and now I'm just going to give a couple of strokes to the root edge here. Again, this is just going to make it easier to glue. Okay. So just get rid of the dark brown stuff. Okay, and now here, if you want to, you can round or taper the leading and trailing edges here. Or you can fly it just the way it is. Okay, you won't be setting altitude records with it, but it'll still fly whether or not you do any type of tapering here. So generally I like to round these over a little bit. And I can do that by just starting by knocking down the corners along the edge. And then I can just kind of roll this back and forth as I'm sanding. Alright, and then look at it in cross section, and it's now rounded there. And if that's all you want to do, that actually improves your aerodynamics by quite a bit. But if you want to make this even better, then you can either round or taper the trailing edge here as well. And I'm going to taper mine, so I'm just going to basically sand an angle into it on each side. Okay, you can also do this by holding a piece of sandpaper on a block or even on a surface and doing it with the pen. Okay, so whichever is more comfortable for you. And here the main thing is just to make them even. Okay, if your taper is uneven, it can make the rocket spin, which some people like to do as well. Okay, so in cross section there you can kind of see that it's tapered and then rounded here, and I'm going to go off camera and do the same thing to the other two fins. Now that the glue is mostly dry on my motor mount here, we're ready to install the Kevlar shock cord. Now, this is unusual from lots of other kits in that the shock cord is actually mounted to the motor mount rather than to a glued on tab like you see in Estes and other kits. Alright, so first just unravel this, make sure there are no knots in it. And you notice this is relatively long, and that's because Kevlar has no elasticity to it like a rubber shock cord does, and so it depends upon the length and the distance that the rocket has to slow down to absorb that energy from the ejection. Now what we're going to do is tie the shock cord around the motor mount tube here. But something they don't show that I like to do is first just cut a notch somewhere in the outer part of the forward ring. And it doesn't have to be really deep, just enough to let the shock cord go through without causing the body tube to bulge out. So just something like that. Alright, and now we're simply going to tie a double knot here in our shock cord. And mine's a little frayed at the end, and that's okay. Use the more frayed end to go down here. Okay. Now Kevlar doesn't like to hold knots very well. It's really slippery on itself. All right, now what I'm going to do is just pull this around so that I'm at my notch there. And now I'm going to just take some more glue, and basically I'm going to bury the Kevlar in it. So the stuff that's going around here, I'm just going to put some glue all the way around. little bit too much there. Alright, so now I'm just going to smooth this around once more, and that frayed stuff, that'll get stuck right down in it. That's fine. Alright, but this is going to really anchor the shock cord down, much more so than the glue-on mounts in other kits. Okay, and then just move your knot if you have to as you were doing that. So we get that there. Okay, and then once again I'm going to allow that to dry for a few minutes before we put it up inside the body tube. Alright, my glue is dry enough that we can work with it again. And now what I'm going to do is just take the shock cord here, and I'm just going to wrap this around my fingers to form a small coil. Alright, and then I'm going to stuff this down inside the motor mount, and this will keep it out of the way as we're gluing the motor mount in. You might take the handle of a knife or your pencil or something like that if you need something to stuff it in there. Alright, now I'm going to come back to my body tube here, and in this case I've got a couple of the fin slots that still have a little bit of residual cardboard there. Okay, so I haven't done anything with this yet. I'm just going to test fit this. So this is going to go up inside, and you can see the ring there inside the fin slot. It's going to go on past. Alright, and then we're going to make this flush. So when it's mounted, it's going to be like that. Okay, and you can just see the little edge of the centering ring there, and just to make sure that's not going to cause us a problem, I'm going to go ahead and pop that in. Okay. So now I'm going to pull this back out. Alright, and this is why you need to make sure this is dry. If you do that while it's still wet, it may separate the rings. And now I'm going to take an applicator and some glue. Okay, and the first thing I'm going to do is make a ring of glue just beyond the fin slots there. Okay, so I'm just putting that glue right above. I don't think we can get this in focus there, but it's right above the fin slots. Alright, I'm just going to make sure that it is even and no gaps in there. Okay, so that's ready to go. And now I'm going to slide this in, but not completely yet. So I'm just going to slide this in until I get to about 2/3, halfway up. All right, I'm not in the glue up here yet, and now I can move the engine mount around so that I can get glue down here on the aft end of the body as well. So here I'm just going to put our bead of glue using my applicator right along the inside edge. And if you get more glue on the motor mount, it's not going to hurt anything. Okay, so put that in there. Alright, now I prefer to have my engine clip on the same side as my launch lug. So this is why it's also a good idea to know where your launch lug is going to go. And now I'm just going to push that in. I can feel it hit the glue there. Alright, I'm going to take my ruler and just use that to find the flush mark, and just like that, it's in. Okay, once again I'm going to let this dry for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we can come back and put the fins in. Now before the glue completely dries here, go along and just kind of squish down a little bit the body tube in between the slots. One of the things that happens, and is really the only negative about pre-slotted tubes like this, is that when you put the motor mount in, sometimes it causes the tube to buckle inward, and you can see just a little bit of a bulge here at each slot. And so sometimes, not always, but sometimes you can lessen that by just kind of giving the tube a little squeeze here while the glue is still wet, and letting that expand a bit. Alright, if you can't get it to do it, don't worry about it. Okay, it'll still work. You always just get a little bit of a kind of a bulge around the fins there. Now I'm going to go ahead and start adding the fins. And this is like most fin jobs here, so we're going to apply some glue to the root edges here. And here, less is actually better. We want a nice, even, thin coat. We really don't want it dripping. We want something that's going to dry fairly quickly and evenly here. So just make a nice, even but thin coat along the whole thing. All right, and then we're just going to pop this into the slot. Okay, and then simply come back as far as it'll go. Alright, so in this case you're going to have just a little bit of a gap there, and then look down the length of the tube and make sure that the fin is standing straight up, and you shouldn't have any gaps in here. Okay, and I'm going to let this just set for about 5 minutes, and then we can go around it and do the same thing to the other 3 fins. I'm going to do that off camera. My fins are still drying, but they're dry enough that I can handle the rocket without them falling over. And so now what I'm going to do here is attach my launch lug. So move that aside for just a moment here. And I'm just going to put a bead of glue on the launch lug itself. Okay, and again, it doesn't have to be really heavy. We'll add fillets to it later. And then I'm just going to put this on where I had marked and sanded for it. Okay, and I'm just going to sight down, and that's really crooked. Just that, and then just sight down again. Make sure that it's in line with the tube and in line with your line. So everything should be nice and parallel there. All right, and that is. And since this is so light, you can go ahead and just stand your rocket up like that to let it dry, which is what I'm going to do. And when we come back, we'll put in the fillets. Now that my launch lug and fins have had time to fully dry, now I need to apply fillets along the fin root edges and along the launch lug. And so I'm just going to run a bead of glue here along facing edges. Okay, and then just take a finger and smooth those in. And so if there are any gaps at any of the edges, this will fill that in. And this also makes a smoother transition between the fins and the body tube, which makes it more aerodynamic, and it strengthens the fins so that they're not only glued on in the through the wall joints, but they will then be glued onto the body tube itself. Okay, and then you can just continue doing this around. Just keep the rocket level so the glue does not run from one end to the other. And some people like to have really thick fillets that blend in really well. If you're going to do that, don't try and do a great big thick bead of glue. Instead, make multiple passes and let each one dry before you go to the next. Okay, and then I'm just going to take this excess on my finger and smooth that into the launch lug here. All right, and then remove the excess. Okay, it looks like I need a little bit more glue there. Alright, and then once again, I'm going to let that dry for a while, and when we come back, we'll assemble the streamer, the shock cord, and the nose cone. While we're waiting for the fillets to dry, we can go right ahead and assemble the nose cone. So it comes in two parts here. And to assemble this, you'll need either some plastic model cement or some thick super glue. Either one will work. The thin super glue usually will work as well. You just got to be careful it doesn't run all over the place. So what I'm going to do here is just apply a bead of glue all the way around the inside of the nose cone here. And you don't want to use a whole lot. If you use excess glue, it'll melt all the plastic, but just enough to give an even bead around there. And then simply take the other end here, insert that, twist it back and forth a few times here to get a good adhesion. Okay, and then just set this aside to dry for at least 20 minutes. My fillets are mostly dry at this point, and you may be able to see, like right here, there may be some little bubbles forming in there, maybe right along here. If you get that, you can just fill that in either with some more glue, or you can use something like this plastic model putty, and you can use that to build up your fillets as well. It doesn't have the strength that glue does, but once you've got glue fillets, and if you just want to fill it in and smooth them out more, this does work really well for that. Okay, also at this point, you need to determine how you're going to paint the rocket. Okay, so I haven't done the streamer and the streamer protector and things like that, because if you want to do your rocket one color, for example, and your nose cone another, it's easier to do that if you paint them separately. Now if you're going to paint this all one color, then you can go ahead and attach everything here and just paint the entire rocket however you're going to. I do suggest that you give it at least a coat or two of primer and sand it lightly in between with some about 400 grit sandpaper. And that's going to give you a better underlayment for then putting on your top coat of whatever color you want. Even if the spray paint you're using is one of these that says it has both primer and paint in the same bottle there, or can, those just don't work as well as having a primer coat first. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of this together, but this is just something to keep in mind that you might want to pause at this point, do your painting, and then come back and do the final assembly. Alright, so if we're ready to assemble, the first thing we need to do is take that shock cord that we stuffed in there and get that back out. And you can either try and stuff it back up through the front. More likely it's going to come out of the back easily. And what I'm going to do here is just find the end. Okay, and then you can just thread this back up through the engine mount. Now if you need to, you can just tape this onto the end of a pencil or something if you're having trouble getting it to go through the thrust ring. I think I can just wiggle that around a bit, or not. Okay, so it's not going to cooperate, so here I'm just going to take a small dowel. Alright, I'm just going to loosely tape that on, stick this up through the rocket. There we go. Okay, and just pull everything back out. Okay, so now you've noticed that That's a whole lot quicker to do than trying to fish it through all by itself. Okay, now something you can do with the Kevlar here, if it keeps trying to fray on you like this, is use a small amount of super glue. All right, just dab that right in there. Looks like this super glue is drying out, but it'll serve its purpose. All right, and then I'm just going to take a tissue and pull that through. And that's just going to lock that in place. Okay, and then take a little alcohol here, which is all that most of the super glue accelerators are. So I'm not gluing my fingers together. And then I'm just going to cut off that frayed piece. And what's left is still being held by the super glue. Okay, so before we put that on the nose cone, we need, first of all, the streamer protector here, and that's just square of Nomex, and just slide that through the slit. All right, and then the streamer itself, right here. Okay, and the color of the streamer will change depending on whatever LOC had in stock. This is the first time I've had a black and white one, though. That's kind of cool. So I'll just put this through the slot as well. Maybe. There we go. Okay, and run that down. And then the last thing to do is tie this on to the nose cone. Now again, if you're going to paint your nose cone a different color, you might want to hold off on this step. Alright, I'm just going to tie that down with a double knot and try to keep as much or as little on this free end as you can. Because you don't want this to get up beside this where it could prevent the nose cone from coming off. So if you have a long free end here, go ahead and cut that back a little bit. And then I like to put just a little touch of super glue on the knot because Kevlar does tend to come unknotted very easily. Just a little dab there, it doesn't take much, and that's just to hold that knot in place. Okay, so when this is ready to fly, what we'll do then is take the streamer and just kind of fold it up on itself a few times. Alright, and when you reach the end, you can go ahead and roll that up. And then I'm going to place that in the middle of my protector there and stuff that down. So the protector forms kind of a piston. And then we simply gather up the rest of the shot cord. You can stick that in there. Okay, and then stick the nose cone on. And I'm going to give it a little shake test here. Alright, and it's trying to come loose. So before I launch this, I'm going to want to put a little piece of masking tape on there. And I'm just going to do this as a demonstration. Alright, and you usually don't even have to go all the way around. Just start out with a partial circumference there. Alright, you see that little free end keeps trying to get caught. I'm going to have to trim it a little bit. Alright, now I can put that in, give it a shake test again, and that's staying in place. So structurally, this rocket is ready to go, but I will go ahead and prime and paint this. I'm not going to show you all the steps involved, but I will come back with the finished product. And then we'll go and look at what we can do with the decals. My rocket has been painted, and I chose to go with a fluorescent green. And for this type of paint, and just about all the fluorescent ones I've seen, you have to start with a white base coat. Now since I used 2 coats of white primer, that was fine, although you can also use an actual white paint and then overcoat it with the fluorescent green. And then I overcoated that with some acrylic gloss, because the green by itself tends to be really flat going on. My last job then is to do the decals, and this comes as one sheet, And if you're trying to match what's on here, either this is being mounted vertically like that and only going around, or this is an old illustration and that used a wider wrap here. Okay, so I'm going to at least use the Big Nuke and the flames here. And so we'll start by first just cutting these out, and I'm going to go ahead and bring it all the way to the edge there so I don't have any white space. Okay, and the first thing I want to do is make sure that I can use this as a wrap so that everything meets the way it should, and it looks like it does. Alright, so now I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to remove that white space. And then do the same thing. I'm going to do it on one end here, and then I can use the other end as overlap space. So just get rid of that. Now we just have to peel this off. Okay, and I'm going to do this so that it is right at the edge of the body tube there. And so you want to start out kind of gentle here. Don't press it all down right away, because if you have to reposition this, you can stretch it a little bit. There we go, and then line it up on itself. And that's why I kept that little bit of white space there, so that I had something for it to overlap onto. Okay, and then the Big Nuke sticker here. Okay, and you can see this is different too. So the one they show on the packaging here has the trefoil with the Big Nuke, and this does not have enough of those to do that and do all the fins. That's okay. Okay, so just like I did there, I'm going to cut the white space off, and this one I'm not going to wrap, although you could if you wanted to. Alright, let me just peel that as we did before, and I'm going to put this in line with my fin that's opposite the launch lug. Here I'm just going to briefly set that down, make sure I've got it aligned. It's a little bit crooked there. Okay, that looks pretty good, and so now I just smooth that down. Okay, and they show the trefoils on each of the fins. You can certainly do that. I'm going to see if I can actually make a wrap of it here. And I don't think the trefoils will go all the way across. But what I am planning to do is make this so that it lines up with the launch lug. And I think that'll look pretty good. Alright, now first I'm going to trim off that little bit of white space there. And do the same thing up here. Okay, so here the plan is to start at the launch lug, bring that all the way around and come back. So now I need to see just how much space I've got. So I need to run it about like that so it's even on both sides. Okay, and I want this right above the fins. I start about there, and again I'm just going to lightly place this on to start with to make sure I'm reasonably lined up. A little bit off, not too bad. Just come around here a little bit and change the angle only a bit. Too much change. Alright, still not quite there, but I'm going to call it good enough. If you're not looking at the launch lug, you won't know the difference. Alright, so I'm going to smooth that all out. Okay, and that is ready to go. So I hope you had fun building this. Have a safe launch, a safe recovery, and stay tuned for more of my videos.